"You're not on the list." The words landed like a slap across a quiet evening breeze, slicing through the soft chatter of people in glittering suits and satin dresses. Every conversation near the entrance slowed. Heads turned. Eyes narrowed. Ethan Carter stood still for a moment, his calm brown eyes meeting the piercing stare of the event manager blocking the doorway. The glow from the downtown skyline glinted off his tailored charcoal suit, a symbol of success he had earned, not inherited. But that didn't seem to matter tonight. The rooftop of the Grandview Pavilion shimmered above the city, the venue for the Summit of Tomorrow, an exclusive event where the most powerful figures in tech and innovation came to celebrate their dominance. Billionaires, investors, media moguls, everyone who shaped the digital world, all gathering to toast themselves beneath the stars. And yet, Ethan, a man whose company had quietly changed the face of artificial intelligence, was being told he didn't belong. "Name?" asked the manager. A man in his late 30s with slicked hair and a clipboard clutched tight like a weapon. His tone wasn't curious. It was challenging. "Ethan Carter," came the calm reply. The manager ran his finger down the guest list once, then again, as if pretending to search. His lips tightened. "You're not on here." A few nearby guests shifted uncomfortably, pretending to check their phones. Others stayed to watch, curiosity flickering in their eyes. This wasn't just about a list. Everyone could sense it. "There must be a mistake," Ethan said evenly, pulling out his phone. "Here's my invitation, sent directly by the organizers." The manager barely looked at it before shaking his head. "You'd be surprised what people fake these days." For a moment, silence filled the space between them, the kind of silence that tests character. Then a cruel smirk spread across the manager's face. "Sir, this is a private event." "Maybe you're at the wrong address." The words weren't just dismissive, they were designed to humiliate. A few people chuckled quietly, then looked away when Ethan's gaze found theirs. Cameras glimmered in the distance, ready to capture something worth sharing online. "What would you do?" a voice might ask in your mind. "If this happened to you?" Ethan didn't raise his voice, didn't argue, didn't even flinch. Because while the manager thought he had power, Ethan was holding something far more dangerous: restraint. Flashback 30 minutes earlier. The same man had stepped out of a sleek black car that barely drew attention. He didn't need flash. He never had. Ethan Carter had built 3 startups from scratch, all profitable, all acquired. His latest venture, Novatech, had just secured a patent that would redefine automation in medicine, a breakthrough valued at billions. But despite that, he preferred subtlety. Success to him wasn't about spectacle. It was about impact. He straightened his tie, nodded to the valet, and walked toward the glass elevator that led to the rooftop. The night sky stretched wide above the skyline, endless like his vision for the future. Yet even before the confrontation, he'd noticed it. The glance from the valet that lingered too long. The coat check clerk, assuming he was part of the service staff. The way conversations paused when he passed by. He'd grown used to these small acts of disbelief. The micro moments that said, "You don't fit our picture of power," and still he smiled. Because tonight was supposed to be a celebration, not of wealth, but of progress. His company had been chosen as a lead sponsor for the summit. He was scheduled to announce a partnership that could revolutionize AI ethics and accountability across the industry. But fate and prejudice had other plans. Inside the venue, the air buzzed with energy. Journalists circled tables. Venture capitalists exchanged predictions like poker players, and CEOs flashed perfect smiles for photo ops. Beneath chandeliers and laughter, everyone seemed to know their place, at least that's what they thought. Near the entrance, standing tall in a crisp navy uniform, was the gatekeeper, Aaron Blake, head of event security. He moved with the kind of confidence that often comes from unchecked authority. He scanned each guest with a faint smirk, greeting the famous with eager deference and the unfamiliar with scrutiny. He saw Ethan walking up and instantly straightened. Something about the man's quiet confidence unsettled him. It wasn't arrogance, it was self-assurance that couldn't be faked. And for people like Aaron, that was a threat. "Evening," Ethan said politely. "Ethan Carter. I'm here for the summit." Aaron lifted his clipboard like a judge raising a gavel. He flipped through the pages slowly, theatrically, ensuring that anyone nearby could sense a problem was about to unfold. His voice grew louder as he repeated the name. Carter. harder. Nope. Don't see it. Guests began to notice. The music softened. Phones lifted discreetly. Ethan spoke with steady patience. I'm one of the event sponsors. I should be on the VIP list. Aaron's lips curved into something that was almost a smile, but not quite. Look, sir, this is a very exclusive event. Maybe check down the street. There's a community seminar happening tonight. The insult hung in the air like smoke. Ethan's jaw tightened. The old frustration, the one he'd buried under years of professionalism, stirred beneath his calm exterior. Still, he didn't react. He simply held up his phone again, the official invitation shining brightly in the light. Anyone can fake these, Aaron said loudly enough for everyone to hear. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some turned away in discomfort. Others, their curiosity morbidly piqued, stayed to witness what they knew would soon go viral. Ethan could have pulled rank. He could have called the organizers, flashed the $30 million sponsorship contract, or demanded Aaron's supervisor. But he didn't. He was thinking further ahead, not about winning this moment, but about changing the system that allowed it to exist. He thought of his 15-year-old daughter, Leah, who idolized him, the way she'd look up from her homework when he walked through the door, asking, "Dad, what did you change in the world today?" He thought of how she'd see this moment online, how cruel comments would twist it, how pain would travel faster than truth. And so he stayed calm, because he wasn't just a father or a CEO tonight. He was a symbol of what came next. Aaron leaned in, his voice low but sharp. "Sir, step aside. You're blocking the entrance." Two guards began moving toward Ethan, uncertain but obedient. Cameras flashed. The hum of recording phones rose like insects around a light, and Ethan finally spoke. Quietly, but with power that carried. "You might want to double-check with your supervisor." Aaron's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. Then his earpiece crackled. A faint voice asked for an update on the situation at the entrance. Aaron turned it off instantly, pretending it hadn't happened. "Sir, I'm going to count to 10. If you're not gone by then, we'll have to remove you." The crowd froze. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8. Each number was a blow to dignity, each second a test of restraint. By the time Aaron reached 1, Ethan simply smiled and said, "You don't need to remove me. I'll leave on my own." And as he walked away, surrounded by flashing cameras and murmurs, he looked every bit the man who already knew how this story would end. Not with revenge, but with revelation. Ethan's shoes clicked softly against the marble as he walked toward the parking lot. Behind him, the chatter resumed, low, curious, judgmental. Cameras still hovered like vultures, hungry for the next viral moment. But Ethan didn't look back. He never looked back. Inside his car, he sat quietly for a long moment. The city pulsed around him in streaks of gold and red, neon reflected on the windshield like a heartbeat. His phone vibrated nonstop, missed calls, notifications, messages piling up from colleagues who'd already seen the incident spreading online. He finally answered one. "Ethan," came a calm voice on the other end. It was David Lee, his longtime lawyer and friend. "I've seen the video. It's everywhere. We can file a discrimination suit first thing in the morning. You'd win easily." "No," Ethan said quietly, his voice steady as stone. "We're not filing anything." There was silence. "Then what are we doing?" Ethan's eyes fixed on the glittering skyline in front of him. "We're going to teach them what accountability looks like." He opened his laptop. On the screen was the $30 million sponsorship agreement between Novatech and the Summit of Tomorrow. His company wasn't just an attendee, it was the financial backbone of the entire event. Without Novatech's sponsorship, the summit wouldn't even exist. He scrolled through the clauses until he reached the one he'd been waiting for. Section 7, Termination, Discriminatory Conduct by Partner Organization. He smiled faintly. "They wanted exclusivity," he murmured, "and they're about to get it." Ethan began typing an email, but not to the summit's organizers. Not yet. Timing, he knew, was everything. Across town, the fallout had already begun. Inside the summit's boardroom, the event director, Karen Holt, stood in front of a massive screen replaying the footage that now had millions of views. The video had spread like wildfire. CEO denied entry to his own sponsored event. The caption alone was enough to set the internet on fire. Comments flooded every platform. Anger, Outrage, disbelief. People are tagging sponsors, Karen said, her voice shaking as she pointed to the screen. They're threatening boycotts. We need damage control. The board chair, Mark Simmons, leaned forward, his face pale. Do we have a statement prepared? We're drafting one, she said. Blaming it on an isolated staff error, Mark frowned. That won't work. People saw the video. That wasn't an accident. That was bias on full display. Karen didn't respond. The truth was written across her face. Meanwhile, Ethan drove through the city in silence, thinking back over the years. He remembered the scholarships that kept him afloat when he was young, the endless late nights building prototypes from second-hand parts, and the professors who said his ideas were too ambitious. He remembered the early investors who doubted him, the journalists who had called him lucky instead of brilliant. But most of all, he remembered the promise he'd made to himself the first time someone told him he didn't belong in a room. Never let their small minds define your worth. That promise had carried him here, to the top of the industry, to a company that employed thousands, and now to a crossroads where humiliation could become history. By the next morning, the video had reached national news. Talk shows debated it. Opinion pieces dissected every second. Activists called for justice. But Ethan still hadn't spoken publicly. His silence became its own kind of message. Reporters filled the void with speculation. Will he sue? Will he pull his funding? What will Novatech do? At the summit's headquarters, panic spread. Sponsors began demanding answers. The PR team couldn't contain the outrage. Then at 10 a.m., the first domino fell. Starlight Ventures, one of the summit's co-sponsors, withdrew their support. By noon, 2 more followed. By sunset, Mark Simmons' phone was ringing nonstop. The summit was bleeding money and reputation, and there was no statement strong enough to stop it. Get me Ethan Carter. Mark snapped. Now. But Ethan didn't pick up. He was already 3 steps ahead. That night, he gathered his core team at Novatech headquarters. The glass conference room overlooked the city lights, the same lights that had watched him be turned away. His COO, Lydia Morales, looked uneasy. Ethan, the video's trending everywhere. Shouldn't we say something? Ethan shook his head. Not yet. Let them keep talking. Every word they say now adds weight to what comes next. And what comes next? Ethan turned the laptop so everyone could see. On screen was the sponsorship agreement, highlighted and ready. He looked at each of them in turn. We're pulling our funding from the summit. Effective immediately. Gasps filled the room. Ethan, Lydia said carefully. That's a $30 million contract. You're aware of what that'll do to their event? Yes, he said simply. It'll end it. He leaned back in his chair. But that's just the beginning. He opened a second document, one he'd been quietly developing for months. A new initiative. The summit used to be the pinnacle of innovation, he said. Now it'll be a lesson. We're building something better, an event that celebrates inclusion, accountability, and genuine progress. Lydia scanned the document and froze. You're creating an entirely new platform? Not just an event, Ethan said. A movement. He looked out the window at the pulsing skyline. They tried to deny me entry to their list, so I'll make my own. And this time, no one gets left off. While Ethan planned in silence, chaos consumed the summit. Behind closed doors, Mark Simmons confronted Aaron Blake in the now infamous lobby. Aaron stood stiffly, his expression hard but his eyes uncertain. You've destroyed us, Mark hissed. Do you have any idea what you've done? Aaron tried to defend himself. I was just following protocol. He didn't look. Mark slammed his hand against the desk. Don't finish that sentence. The HR director stepped forward. We've reviewed the footage and your prior complaints. This isn't your first incident. Aaron's face drained of color. Effective immediately, he was suspended. But by then, it was too late. The story had already escaped into the world, reshaping itself with every retelling, and Ethan Carter hadn't even spoken yet. That silence, intentional, controlled, and razor-sharp, became the most powerful statement of all. Every hour it continued. Public sympathy grew. Every unanswered call fueled speculation. When he finally broke his silence, the entire industry would be watching, and he knew it. He wasn't just going to respond. He was going to redefine the rules. He leaned over the glowing city and whispered to himself, Let's see who's really on the list now. The next morning arrived heavy with anticipation. News anchors called it the most powerful silence in tech. Commentators speculated endlessly. Every podcast, every article asked the same question. What will Ethan Carter do next? Inside his office, sunlight spilled through the tall windows as his assistant placed a cup of coffee on the desk. "You've got over 100 interview requests," she said softly. "CNN, Forbes, The Chronicle. Everyone wants your statement." Ethan smiled faintly. "Good. Let them wait a little longer." He turned his attention to the plan that had kept him awake through the night. He had no intention of ranting on camera or demanding apologies. No lawsuits. No hashtags. What he was about to do was bigger, calculated, systemic, and irreversible. While the media feasted on outrage, Ethan met privately with his senior executives. Around the polished oak table sat the people who had helped him build Novatech from the ground up. They looked uneasy, waiting for him to speak. He began calmly, but every word carried purpose. What happened last night wasn't an accident. It wasn't about one man at the door. It's about an entire system that decides who belongs and who doesn't. We can't change bias overnight, but we can change the structure that allows it to thrive. Lydia leaned forward. "You want to go public with this?" Ethan shook his head. "Not yet. Before we speak, we act." He clicked to a slide on the screen. Across the top, bold letters read Project Horizon. The initiative detailed funding, partnerships, and reform plans for a new kind of innovation conference. One built on open access, verified equality, and measurable diversity. "This," Ethan said, "will replace the summit of tomorrow. The difference is simple. Everyone with ideas gets a seat. No one gets turned away." The team exchanged stunned looks. It was ambitious, maybe even impossible, but in Ethan's presence, impossibility always sounded negotiable. That same afternoon, Novatech's legal team sent formal termination notices to the summit's board. The email was brief, professional, final, effective immediately. All sponsorship funds were withdrawn due to discriminatory conduct and breach of ethical standards. When the notice landed in Mark Simmons's inbox, he went pale. "He actually did it," he whispered. "He killed us." Within hours, the story broke across every major outlet. Novatech cancels $30 million sponsorship following discrimination scandal. The summit's reputation imploded. Ticket holders demanded refunds. Vendors backed out. Other sponsors followed Ethan's lead, cutting ties to protect their brands. Mark called an emergency board meeting, his voice strained. "We need to contact him before this becomes irreversible." Karen, the PR director, shook her head. "It's already irreversible. He doesn't want an apology. He's rewriting the rules." As the summit collapsed, Ethan's initiative quietly gained momentum. He called on longtime allies, founders, investors, and academics who shared his vision for fairness in tech. Some joined out of conviction, others out of fear of being left behind. He didn't care about their motives. He cared about the outcome. By week's end, Project Horizon had 10 major partners and commitments exceeding $70 million. It wasn't just an event anymore. It was an ecosystem. Research grants, mentorship programs, and startup incubators for underrepresented innovators. While the world debated his silence, Ethan was already building the next chapter. At home that evening, he sat at the dining table with his daughter, Leah. Her school laptop sat open. The viral video paused on the moment Aaron Blake told her father he wasn't on the list. Leah frowned. "It's not fair." "You did nothing wrong." Ethan nodded. "You're right. But sometimes fairness isn't given. It's built." She tilted her head. "You mean like your company?" He smiled. "Exactly. You don't fight ignorance with anger. You fight it with results." Leah thought for a moment, then said, "So you're building something new?" He placed his hand over hers. "Something that will make sure no one ever has to feel what I felt at that door." 3 days later, the summit's remaining board members held a desperate conference call. Their brand had become toxic. No publicist could save it. Sponsors were leaving, and their once prestigious reputation was now a global embarrassment. During that call, Mark Simmons' assistant interrupted. "Sir, Ethan Carter just released a statement." Every face on the video feed froze. Mark took a deep breath. "Play it." The screen filled with Ethan's face, calm, controlled, no anger. "Innovation," he began, "was meant to unite us, to build bridges between ideas and people. But somewhere along the way we built gates instead. He paused. What happened to me last week wasn't unique. It happens every day, to people whose names you don't know. But now the world does know. And we're going to change it together. He went on to announce the official launch of Project Horizon, a global platform promoting equal opportunity in technology and science, backed by corporate sponsors, universities, and government partners. The feed ended, but the impact rippled instantly. The internet erupted with support. Journalists praised the vision. Leaders across industries echoed his message. And the summit of tomorrow, once the crown jewel of elite networking, was finished. Aaron Blake watched the broadcast alone in his apartment, surrounded by unopened mail and silence. The man who once guarded doors now found every door closed to him. He reached for his phone, drafting an apology that would never sound sincere enough. He tried to tell himself it wasn't his fault, but every replay of the video reminded him that it was. He shut the phone off and sat in the dark, the world outside moving on without him. Back at Novatech, Ethan's phone rang again. It was Mark Simmons. "Ethan, please," Mark began, his voice breaking. "We made mistakes, but the organization can't survive without your support. You've made your point." "Isn't that enough?" Ethan looked out his office window at the skyline where his humiliation had begun. "No, Mark, it's not about a point. It's about progress. You can't rebuild trust with excuses," Mark sighed. "Then what do you want from us?" Ethan turned back to his desk, tapping a folder labeled Reform Proposal. "I'll tell you what I want. I want change. Real change." The next day they met face to face. Ethan laid the document on the table. Inside was a detailed reform blueprint. Mandatory anti-bias training, independent audits, transparent reporting systems, diverse hiring standards, and oversight committees with actual enforcement power. "If you want your organization to survive," he said, "sign this. Not for me, for the next generation that deserves better." Mark read through the terms in silence. Then finally he nodded. "We'll do it." Ethan extended his hand. "Good, because this isn't just the end of the summit. It's the beginning of something bigger." Outside, the media waited, hungry for confrontation. When Ethan stepped out, microphones surged toward him. "Mr. Carter, are you suing the summit? Will you accept their apology? Do you plan to attend future events?" He smiled faintly and said only one line. "I'm not interested in revenge. I'm interested in rebuilding the system." He walked away as flashbulbs flickered, knowing this was far from over. What had started as one man being told he didn't belong was now a movement that questioned every list, every door, every definition of belonging. And Ethan Carter was just getting started. Weeks passed, and the storm that began on one rooftop turned into something much larger. What had started as a scandal became a movement, one that reached far beyond Ethan's city. Companies that once prided themselves on sleek branding and polished diversity statements now faced uncomfortable questions. Employees whispered in hallways, shareholders demanded answers, and executives realized silence could destroy them faster than any lawsuit. Project Horizon became the new benchmark. Within its first month, over 200 organizations requested partnership. Universities asked to adapt its framework into leadership programs. Media outlets ran headlines like "The future has a new gatekeeper, and he's letting everyone in." Ethan refused every talk show invitation. He wasn't interested in fame. Instead, he met with his small leadership circle daily, refining the blueprint for systemic change. Their mission was simple: end the unspoken barriers that determined who was seen and who was dismissed. At one of those meetings, Lydia spread out reports showing skyrocketing engagement. "We're being called a revolution," she said. "But revolutions burn fast. You're thinking longer term, aren't you?" Ethan nodded. "Movements inspire. Systems endure. I'm not here to inspire outrage. I'm here to build a framework no one can undo." He wasn't exaggerating. His legal team had already filed paperwork creating the Horizon Foundation, an independent body with oversight across industries. The foundation would collect data, investigate complaints, and publish public accountability reports twice a year. It wasn't rhetoric, it was measurable reform. That same week, a new wave of testimonies appeared online. Executives, scientists, artists, and engineers shared their own versions of what had happened to Ethan. Stories of closed doors, silent assumptions, and subtle dismissals poured in by the thousands. One post read, "I watched Ethan Carter's story and realized I've been quiet for too long. Yesterday I spoke up at my firm. Today we're starting inclusion audits." Every story added momentum. Every voice turned the spark brighter. Meanwhile, at what remained of the summit's headquarters, Mark Simmons stared at the dwindling staff. Half of the team had resigned. Sponsors were gone. The once busy phones were silent. Yet strangely, Mark felt relief rather than despair. The collapse had revealed truth. He called Ethan. "You were right," he said quietly when Ethan answered. "We built a system that celebrated innovation while rejecting the innovators who didn't fit our image. If we survive this, I want your foundation's help rebuilding from the ground up." Ethan agreed on one condition: full transparency. No hidden committees. No quiet settlements. Every reform had to be public, every mistake documented. Mark didn't hesitate. He signed without blinking. The news broke the next morning. The summit partners with Horizon Foundation for Structural Reform. What was once a symbol of exclusion now pledged allegiance to inclusion. The story trended worldwide. Investors who had once distanced themselves now returned, drawn by the moral clarity of the transformation. The very system that had humiliated Ethan now stood as proof of his approach. Change through structure, not destruction. But even as the world celebrated, one person watched in silence: Aaron Blake. The man whose pride had set this all in motion was now unemployable. Every attempt to re-enter the industry ended before the first interview. His name appeared in training slides and corporate case studies titled, "How Bias Destroys Careers." He had become an example rather than an individual. In his small apartment, he watched Ethan's latest interview clip on his laptop. The interviewer asked, "Would you ever forgive the man who turned you away that night?" Ethan smiled gently before answering, "Forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's about transforming it. I don't need an apology. I need assurance that no one else will ever have to earn dignity twice." Aaron closed the laptop and sat in darkness, realizing that in one night, his small act of arrogance had rewritten his entire life. Months later, the first Horizon conference was announced. Held in the same city where the infamous incident had occurred, it drew thousands of attendees from across the world. Tickets sold out in hours. The event's mission was clear: equal access, transparent selection, and opportunity for every voice. As Ethan walked through the entrance on opening night, the same marble floors that once echoed with humiliation now greeted him with applause. People of every background filled the hall, shaking hands, exchanging ideas, laughing freely. A volunteer handed him a name badge that read simply, "Ethan Carter, Founder Horizon." He smiled at the simplicity of it. No red carpet treatment, no velvet rope, no lists, just a name and purpose. On stage, his opening words captured the audience immediately. "Innovation begins when the walls come down," he said. "Not when the right people are invited, but when everyone is." The crowd rose in applause that didn't feel performative. It felt genuine, like release after years of quiet pressure. Later that evening, as he stepped outside, he received a text message from an unknown number. It was from Aaron. The message was short. "I'm sorry. I finally understand." Ethan read it twice, then deleted it without responding. Not from bitterness, but because the message wasn't meant for him. It was meant for the man who sent it. By year's end, Horizon's reach extended far beyond tech. Hospitals, financial institutions, and media networks began adopting its accountability protocols. Government offices invited Ethan to consult on new ethical frameworks. His approach, measured, precise, compassionate, was reshaping corporate culture globally. One evening, as he reviewed the Foundation's quarterly report, Leah walked in with a newspaper folded under her arm. "You made the front page again," she said with a grin. He laughed softly. Still weird seeing that. She read the headline aloud. "Horizon Initiative Reduces Industry Discrimination by 70% in 6 months." He leaned back in his chair. "It's a start," she smiled. "You changed everything, Dad." He shook his head. "We changed everything. Because real change never belongs to one person." Leah looked out the window at the skyline where the whole story began. "Do you think people like Aaron will ever learn?" Ethan sighed, thoughtful. "Some will. Others won't. But if the system changes, then their ignorance loses power." He closed the report and smiled at her. "That's what matters." The next day, Ethan received an invitation to speak at the Global Business Summit in Geneva. The letter praised Horizon's achievements and asked him to deliver the keynote on equality and leadership. The irony didn't escape him. It was the same organization that once modeled itself after the Summit of Tomorrow. The one that had rejected him, he accepted. When he took the stage months later, standing beneath a banner that read, "The future belongs to everyone," the applause was thunderous. Yet his speech was simple. "The world doesn't change because one person fights back," he said. "It changes because that person refuses to walk away. We all get moments that test our patience, our dignity, our worth. What defines us is what we build afterward." His closing words echoed through the hall. When someone tells you that you don't belong, remember this. You were never waiting for their permission. You were always the list. The audience rose to their feet, applauding until the hall vibrated. As Ethan left the stage, reporters swarmed him again, but this time their questions were different. Not about controversy or blame, but about vision and future. He answered briefly, smiling with quiet confidence. Outside, under the cool Geneva sky, he looked up at the stars and thought about that night. The clipboard, the crowd, the humiliation that became rebirth. He realized that sometimes the world changes not with noise or anger, but with structure, purpose, and relentless clarity. What began as exclusion had become expansion, and Ethan Carter, once told he wasn't on the list, had built a world where everyone was. Years passed, and the world Ethan Carter had dreamed of began to take shape in ways even he hadn't imagined. What started as one man's quiet defiance had become the foundation of a global movement. The phrase "on the list" transformed from a symbol of exclusion into a reminder of progress, used in classrooms, boardrooms, and even governments as shorthand for fairness. By now, the Horizon Foundation operated offices on every continent. Its principles guided hiring, promotion, and innovation policies across industries. Annual reports showed not only improved representation, but measurable growth in creativity and profits. The numbers proved what Ethan had always believed, that inclusion wasn't charity, it was strategy. At conferences, young entrepreneurs proudly called themselves Horizon Generation. They had grown up hearing his story. Some carried printed photos of the moment he'd been turned away. Not as tragedy, but as transformation. To them, Ethan wasn't just a CEO. He was a reminder that dignity and intelligence could change the world when patience met purpose. One crisp morning, Ethan stood in front of a classroom at a university that had just adopted Horizon standards. He was a guest lecturer now, invited not to talk about business but about leadership. The students listened intently as he said, "Power doesn't mean control. It means responsibility. The moment you can open a door for someone else, that's the moment you've earned your success." Afterward, a student raised her hand. "Mr. Carter," she asked, "if you could go back to that night, would you change anything?" Ethan smiled softly. "No," he said. "That night gave me purpose. Pain can build walls or it can build systems. I chose systems." The classroom fell silent. For many of those students, it was the first time they had heard someone speak of injustice as a blueprint rather than a burden. Later that day, as Ethan walked through the campus courtyard, a familiar voice called out his name. He turned and saw a woman in her 20s holding a notebook close to her chest. "Mr. Carter," she said shyly, "I think you knew my father." Ethan looked at her face and saw the resemblance instantly. "Sarah Blake?" She nodded. "Yes, he passed away last year, but before he did, he made me promise to find you. He wanted me to thank you." Ethan's expression softened. "Thank me? For what?" He said your response to what happened saved him from becoming a bitter man. He never forgave himself, but he said you showed him what accountability really means, that it's not revenge, it's rebuilding. For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. Then he nodded slowly. "Your father made a mistake," he said. "But you're here continuing something better. That's how change survives, through people who decide to do different." Sarah smiled faintly. "I'm studying social justice and policy reform. I'd like to intern for Horizon one day." Ethan looked at her, pride flickering behind his calm demeanor. "You just earned your spot." Years later, as technology and society evolved together, the Horizon Foundation grew beyond reform. It became a model for human governance, an institution woven into how progress itself was measured. Nations cited Horizon standards when drafting trade agreements and workplace laws. Corporations referenced its ethics clauses when writing mission statements. Its language became the language of fairness. Ethan, now older, found himself stepping away from daily leadership. His days of board meetings and press conferences had given way to quiet mentorship. He spent more time with Leah, who had become Horizon's director of global operations. She ran the foundation with the same grace he once did, though with sharper edges and quicker instincts. One evening, father and daughter sat together in the garden outside his home overlooking the city skyline that had once been a battlefield for his dignity. Leah held a glass of tea and said, "You know, sometimes I read the reports and think, Dad really built the world he wanted to live in." Ethan smiled, eyes reflecting the fading light. "Not the world I wanted," he said. "The world I wished existed when I was your age." She looked at him fondly. "You did more than wish. You built it." He laughed quietly. "Then it's your turn to keep building. The work never ends, Leah. Every generation will face its own version of that door." She nodded, her gaze steady. "Then we'll keep opening it." When Ethan passed away years later, the world mourned not with sorrow but with gratitude. Flags outside global headquarters flew at half-mast. Universities held moments of silence. Thousands of people posted stories about how his courage had changed their lives. But the most moving tribute came not from a world leader or a billionaire donor. It came from a janitor in Johannesburg, who wrote, "I was once told I didn't belong in a management meeting. My supervisor used Ethan Carter's handbook to rewrite company policy. Now I run that department. He never knew me, but he changed everything for me." His message was shared millions of times. In the weeks that followed, Leah announced the creation of the Carter Institute for Equal Access and Innovation, dedicated to ensuring that Horizon's mission continued across future generations. Its slogan was a phrase her father had often repeated: "You were always the list." The world embraced it. The phrase appeared on billboards, school walls, even currency in one small nation that credited Horizon for helping modernize its economy. Decades later, a young student researching the origins of Horizon sat in a library, reading about that night at the Grandview Pavilion, the night a man was told he didn't belong. She frowned at the old headlines and shook her head in disbelief. "Hard to imagine people used to think like that," she whispered. The librarian smiled. "They still do sometimes, but less now because someone proved another way was possible." The student nodded and returned to her notes. Outside, the city glowed with the pulse of innovation, more diverse, more open, more humane than ever before. And though time had carried Ethan Carter's name into history, his presence lingered in the systems he built. In every open door, every opportunity extended, every voice finally heard. He had once been turned away with 4 simple words. Now the world spoke a different phrase, written into the very architecture of its progress. Everyone belongs. And somewhere beyond time and recognition, that quiet, steady voice that once said, "I'll leave on my own," seemed to whisper again. Not in defiance, but in peace. We're all on the list now. Many years after Ethan Carter's death, the world he had helped to build reached a turning point once more. The systems he designed had grown vast, powerful, and deeply embedded in every major institution. Horizon was now not just a foundation. It was an idea that shaped laws, corporate codes, and the very definition of progress. Yet even the most perfect systems faced the temptation of forgetting why they were born. Leah Carter, now in her late 40s, stood in her father's old office overlooking the same skyline that had witnessed his humiliation and triumph. The walls were lined with awards, citations, and portraits from every corner of the globe. But it wasn't the past she was thinking about, it was the present. Reports lay open across her desk showing that despite decades of reform, subtle new inequalities were rising again, hidden behind data, algorithms, and automation. Technology had evolved faster than empathy. Artificial intelligence now influenced hiring, housing, and education decisions across nations. The irony was painful. Ethan's own field of innovation had given rise to a new kind of exclusion, one that didn't wear a human face. Leah stared at the report, her mind echoing her father's words. "Every generation will face its own version of that door." She whispered into the empty room. "Looks like it's my turn." That evening, she gathered Horizon's senior counsel in the global headquarters. Representatives from 40 countries joined via holographic link. The tension was visible even through the shimmering projections. Leah began without pleasantries. Our systems were built to protect fairness. But they're failing quietly. The new bias isn't emotional, it's mathematical. It's hiding inside the code. A delegate from Tokyo spoke up. Are you suggesting our own technology has become the new gatekeeper? Leah nodded. Exactly. We built algorithms to make decisions faster, but we forgot that speed doesn't equal justice. A murmur spread through the digital room. Some faces looked defensive, others worried. Leah raised her voice slightly, calm but firm. My father once said you can't fight ignorance with anger. You fight it with results. That's what we'll do again. Within weeks, she launched what would become known as the Carter Protocols, a global initiative to audit artificial intelligence systems for bias and inequality. Every corporation that partnered with Horizon would be required to comply. The move was radical, and the backlash came instantly. Major tech firms argued that Horizon had no right to interfere with proprietary algorithms. Politicians accused Leah of overreach. Anonymous online groups called her a tyrant, yet the public stood behind her. Millions remembered her father's story and trusted that she was following the same compass. When pressure mounted, Leah called a press conference. Cameras from around the world pointed at her as she stood before a simple backdrop bearing Horizon's motto, "Everyone belongs." She began softly. Years ago, a man was told he wasn't on the list. He didn't shout. He didn't retaliate. He rebuilt the system so no one else would face that door. But today that door is back, it just looks different. It's hidden behind screens and software. The room fell silent as her voice grew stronger. We will not let technology become the new excuse for exclusion. We will not trade dignity for efficiency, and we will not let the future forget the past. Her words rippled across the globe. The next day, international headlines declared, Leah Carter declares war on algorithmic bias. Protesters gathered in city squares supporting her mission, carrying signs that read, "Keep humanity in progress." Inside corporate boardrooms, executives who had once dismissed Horizon's influence now scrambled to adapt. A few tried to resist, but the public demanded transparency. Governments began passing legislation modeled after the Carter Protocols. The balance of power shifted again, this time from code to conscience. Months later, Leah received an invitation from the United Nations to address the General Assembly. Standing at the same podium where her father had once spoken decades earlier, she looked out at the sea of delegates. Every continent, every flag, every belief was represented there. When my father built Horizon, she began, he wasn't fighting people. He was fighting systems, and today we continue that fight. Our enemy isn't a person or a company. It's indifference disguised as progress. She paused and looked around the massive chamber. He proved that change doesn't start with power. It starts with one person refusing to walk away. I'm asking all of us to be that person now. The delegates rose to their feet. Applauding not just a speech, but a legacy continued. After the assembly, Leah walked alone through the quiet corridors of the UN building. A security guard approached her timidly, holding an old photograph. It showed a younger Ethan Carter standing in front of the Grandview Pavilion, the night everything began. The guard smiled. My mother was there that night. She said she saw him walk away calm. She said it changed her life. Leah took the photo gently. It changed the world, she said. That night, as she returned to her hotel, Leah opened her father's old journal, the one he had carried everywhere, but rarely written in. On the last page, in neat handwriting, he had written only one line. The fight never ends, but neither does the light. She closed the journal and looked out at the city lights shimmering below. They reflected in her eyes the way they once had in his, and somewhere beyond time and silence, the same spirit that once walked away from a closed door now stood beside her, unseen but felt, whispering that the torch was safe in her hands. Under her leadership, Horizon entered a new era, where justice was not just protected but constantly renewed. Each policy, each protocol, each reform traced back to a single moment, when a man chose calm over fury, strategy over noise, and transformation over vengeance. Generations from now, when students study ethics and leadership, they won't just learn about Ethan or Leah Carter. They'll learn about the night the world realized that belonging isn't something given, it's something built and rebuilt. again and again, and as the lights of the city glowed brighter, an unspoken truth lingered in the air, timeless and certain. There will always be another door. But as long as there are people willing to open it, humanity will never stop moving forward.